In this video I want to talk about the Canon RF100-300mm f2.8 LIS lens, because I think it's a lens that is causing a bit of discussions and controversies. Some people say that it's not performing very well with extenders, it's rather heavy, rather large and quite expensive. And while all of that is completely true, it still became my favorite telephoto lens for wildlife photography. This doesn't mean that there are no downsides, and in this video I want to talk about my experiences after owning this lens for more than a year and 4 months or something. What do I like about the lens, what do I not like, and I want to keep this video as like a real world review as possible. So I will not show you any side-by-side comparisons in terms of sharpness. I already did this in a video like almost 2 years ago when I first tested this lens. This time it should really be about my long-term experiences and especially about the use cases, because I think it's a fantastic lens, but it might not be the right choice for everybody. So the first thing you notice when you pick up this lens is that it actually feels heavier than it looks like. And I got this feedback from several people that lifted up this lens and also lifted up the RF600mm f4 because they have the complete opposite effect. The lens here is 32 centimeters long, but with 2.6 kilos, it's just heavier than it looks like from the outside, whereas the RF600mm f4 is the complete opposite. It's a very large lens. I think it's like around 47 centimeters long without the lens hood, but it's only half a kilo heavier than this lens, more or less. The lens has an internal zoom from 100 to 300mm, and I would say it's around a 90-degree turn to get from 100 to 300mm, so something I can quite easily do with just one finger without needing to adjust my hand when zooming, and that's very convenient if I quickly want to switch, let's say from a portrait to a shot that shows more of the environment. As you can see, I put the lens here in a lens code. I linked that below, and one thing that I changed really in the beginning was the lens foot, because this one comes with the same lens foot as the RF600mm f4, which is just, yeah, it looks stupidly big. It just takes too much space in the backpack, so I went for this Wimberley here that I linked below. What I also added here is the Peak Design straps. I don't use them so often, but sometimes in the mountains, when I also want to use the binoculars, I like to have it still over my shoulder. As you can see in the lens code, first of all, I removed some elements here where we have the focus, zoom and the control ring. And I also cut down a part here for the memory set button or function button, however you can configure it. And I'm still thinking if I should do the same for the 4 function buttons that you have here hidden below the lens code. The focus preset works a bit differently than with many other Canon lenses, such as the RF600mm f4. To be honest, I would have preferred somehow a consistent setup, but this one here works quite well with the new cameras such as the R5 Mark II and R1, where you can configure a bit more. What I definitely like is the lens hood is rather short, or it's long enough for most situations, I feel, but it's rather short, so it doesn't make the lens look so big, and it packs down quite small. I think it was only too short in 1 or 2 situations when there was quite some heavy snow combined with wind that I had some snowflakes on the lens in the end, but it was overall not too bad. And what I really like is that Canon delivers this lens with a classical lens cap, which I find much more convenient than this rather stupid solutions that you need to pull over where you always need 2 hands. So this was a very good decision in my opinion from Canon. The lens has a minimum focus distance of 1.8 meters, and this gives you a maximum magnification of around 0.16, which is not great for close-up or macro work. For some bird portraits it works quite well if you use the 2x extender, and I used it for example of this shot of the puffin where I used the 2x extender, and in this situation I got reasonably close. I will talk a bit more about that later. In terms of image quality, throughout the whole zoom range from 100 to 300mm, I felt that the lens is very sharp, even wide open, especially in the lower range. So 100, 135mm, I noticed when I was shooting in the snow that especially towards the edges and corners of the frame, you get a bit of chromatic aberration, but it's not too bad. I just noticed that. When using the 1.4 extender, you reach up to 420mm at f4, and here the sharpness was still good. It took a slight drop, but still quite good. But I noticed that the chromatic aberrations got a bit stronger, again mainly towards the edge of the frame. Finally, when using the 2x extender, you notice a significant drop in the image quality. For me, it was still usable, but if I do a side-by-side comparison with the RF600mm f4 and the RF100-300, both wide open, even though the 600mm f4 is one stop faster, it's really sharper. But for me, I usually use this lens when I don't expect that I need 600mm, but when I expect to be more in the 100 to, let's say, 400mm range, and then occasionally I need a bit more focal length. And what I really enjoy here is the wide open aperture, f2.8 with the 1.4 extender f4, and as I mentioned with the 2x extender f5.6, and especially in the lower range, this just allows you for some nice background separation, and this is why I often prefer it over, for example, my RF100-500mm that is a bit sharper at 500mm than this here with the 2x extender, or actually even noticeable sharper, but I just prefer the look of this lens here. Additionally, we have nowadays very good tools, for example Topaz Photo AI, that you can use to still sharpen the images a bit, and you can see one image that I sharpened a bit with Topaz Photo AI. With the 2x extender you can see the raw on the left and the sharpened version on the right, so I think that's not too big of a deal unless you combine very heavy cropping with needing to sharpen. The autofocus worked very well on this lens, of course the best without using extenders, and it felt quicker and almost more reliable than my RF600mm f4, and what I really noticed, it's much more quiet than the RF600mm f4. You can still hear it, but it's much more quiet than the 600mm, and I was also very happy with the image stabilizer. So it works very well. I was shooting like a month ago with my friend Chris at a river. We were taking pictures of some icicles with the water flowing below, and we wanted to get some long shutter speeds, and I didn't have my RF100-500 with me. I didn't bring it to Germany, so I just shot with this one, which was really overkill, but it was a good exercise or good opportunity to test really the image stabilizer. And throughout the whole range from 100 to almost 300mm, I was shooting with 1/8 of a second, and I still got sharp shots. Of course, in these circumstances, it's important to use the electronic shutter and also to take several pictures so that you can pick the sharp one, because let's face it, not all of them will be sharp. So now I want to show you some images that I got over the last, well, more than a year with this lens, and explain a bit the story behind them and why this lens was suitable for these shots, or maybe in which situation it was not. And I want to start with this young ibex, with this young alpine ibex. You can see that the nose or one of the eyes a bit covered by snow because it was looking for food, for some grasses in the snow. And I liked, this was taken with 100mm f2.8, and I like that we see the background. We see the fog in the valley, we see the hills and also a bit the mountains farther in the background that get a little bit of this diffuse sunlight. It was already like a bit before sunset, and I like the colors, I like this surrounding. And if you shoot with 100 to 500mm, this at f4.5 at 100mm, the background will just not look as smooth. So I was very happy to have this lens here. A few months later I was in Norway taking pictures of the golden plover, and I started taking pictures with the 600mm f4, and then I realized, hey, that's stupid. One of my dream images was the golden plover with more of the surroundings, with showing these mountains and this fjell landscape. So I switched to the 100 to 300, and I slowly approached them, and they were quite tolerant, and I managed to take some shots, I would say ranging between maybe 150 and 300mm. And I like that in the background we can still see like the hills, the mountains, we see the dark clouds coming in. It was like the weather really changed from bright to, or from sunny to rain, and the zoom gave me a lot of flexibility here, and at the same time the f2.8 aperture just allowed me to make sure that the bird is still the main subject in the image, and that the background is not getting too dominant. a few weeks later, I took some images of puffins on an island, and here I used the full 300mm because on top, otherwise I would have the bright sky in the background, because what you see like slightly orange, yellowish here in the background is not the sky, it's actually the mainland. Just to show you here, it also handles backlight very well, and here I was using all the 300mm that I had, but it doesn't need to be always very special or special species. This is a picture of a mallard that is like so widely distributed in Europe, and I just liked the light, like this early morning backlit with some mist or fog coming off the water, and in the background you can see the reeds are nicely blurred, and I think this was again a strength of having this 2.8 over f4 or f5.6, because like this it looks a bit smoother, it distracts less, and it still gives some context. One more image that I want to show you was this one of this black grouse here. I went to the mountains in last autumn actually to test the Canon R1, and I was taking pictures of ptarmigan, and because I went with my tent, and I went with a tent for a 2-day trip, and I also needed to carry the food, the water, and so on. I didn't want to take too much equipment in the mountains, so I just took one telephoto lens. In fact, I took 2 lenses in total. I took the RF100-300mm and the RF100-300mm. And in the morning, I went to look for the rock ptarmigan. When suddenly this black grouse came in, I tried to reposition myself that I have the mountains in the background that have some fresh snow and a little bit of like pinkish colors in the background. And as you can see here, I didn't even use the full 300mm. I could have done this with a 70-200, but the problem is probably I would not have gone to the mountains with just a 70-200. I would have wanted more focal length, and 300mm would have been too much here. So I was very happy about this zoom, about this flexibility that I have. Finally, one picture of a stoat that I had encountered a few months ago, and there I used my R5 Mark II because I was not sure how close I would get, and I thought maybe I have enough light, maybe I'm happy about having a few more pixels to crop. And I shot this picture at 420mm, but I still needed to crop a bit, so in retrospect I should have taken the 2x extender, but it still worked reasonably well. And you can also see I used gigapixel from Photo AI to upscale the image, and you can see on the left the original, on the right the upscaled one, and I think the image quality is still very good. So it was not the ideal choice, but for the rest of the day I think I never even reached the 300mm. I was taking pictures of ibex and didn't need so much focal length, and it still worked. I still have the shot, it's still good, I could still print it, maybe not 2 meters wide, but a reasonable size. So it's not always the perfect lens, but as you saw, I had many encounters in the last 1.5 years that I was very happy with. So to summarize, yes, it's a lens that has definitely some weaknesses. As mentioned, the 2x extender doesn't perform amazing, even though I have the feeling, for example, several 400mm 2.8 lenses are also not taking this 2x extender as well as, for example, the 600mm f4. It's a bit larger and much heavier than, for example, the 300mm 2.8 from Sony, and also more expensive. On the other hand, it's an extremely flexible lens, and this is why it became my favorite lens. And if I would need to decide to let go of either this lens or the RF 600mm f4, I think it would be the RF 600mm f4 that would actually need to leave, because I get it, for wildlife photography, especially bird photography, we often need a lot of focal length, but I also feel these are often a bit more boring shots, and I feel with this lens here I can just get more creative, I can include more of the environment. And if I go to the mountains, I think since I own this lens, so more than a year now, I have not really used the 600mm f4 very often, only for a few occasions, like for the bearded vulture. But if I just went for ibex, chamois, even some songbirds, ptarmigan, I just used this lens and I was very happy with it. If the animals were farther away and I could not really include the environment in a nice way, then I just went back and used the 1.4 or 2x extender, and that still worked. If the lens is right for you is a different question. So I think for example, for me, the 70-200mm f2.8 that I had before, I just felt like it was often too short, because in at least 50% of the cases, I think even more, I wanted to have the range between 200 and 300mm and not the one between 70-200. and that was one of the reasons why I got this lens. However, if you are most of the time shooting between 100 and 200 millimeter, and for the cases where you need more than 200 millimeters, you say you're also fine with having a, let's say, 260, 280 millimeter f4 lens, then maybe have a look at the new Canon 70-200, the new one with this internal zoom that you can also use with extenders. Much cheaper, much lighter, probably you will enjoy it more. And if you are a bird photographer that often wants more focal length and says, I usually don't care about the whole zoom range below 300 millimeters. I want a 300 millimeter 2.8, sometimes shoot at 420, sometimes even at 600 millimeter. Then I think maybe a used EF 300 millimeter f2.8 LIS of the second generation makes more sense. It's slightly lighter, I think, more or less the same dimensions, or even slightly smaller, and it even takes the extenders a little bit better. So this could also be an interesting solution. I hope this was helpful for you. If you want to pick up this lens, I linked it down below. If you buy over this lens, you just support my channel. I also linked all the other things that I have attached to this lens. Let me know if you have used this lens in the past or if you are interested in buying it, and then see you in the next video.